Okay, last one. We're returning to this topic of a socially optimal tariff, and what I have on this graph is I have social welfare on the y-axis and the level of the tariff on the x-axis. So this is zero tariff, free trade, and as we move in this direction, then the tariff becomes higher and higher. I've arbitrarily picked a point on this graph. I'm going to pick this one and say that this is the amount of social welfare that occurs in autarky. So you'll recall that if this is supply and this is demand in the home market, then this becomes price in autarky, and this is consumer surplus, and this is producer surplus, and the area of those two together in autarky gives us this much social welfare. Then, as a home government imposes a tariff, if that country is large, well then we get, if you recall from the last video, these very small triangles of deadweight loss, and they are really overwhelmed by the amount of tariff paid by the row producer. That's bigger than these two, right? If the tariff is small tariff. So in that situation, as the tariff gets bigger, social welfare at home improves. Now obviously row is a loser in this. The row producer is paying for part of this tariff, but looking at social welfare just from a home perspective, we actually see that as the tariff increases, we're moving in this direction, social welfare gets better. In other words, that box is bigger than those two triangles combined. Alright? But then at some point, that winds up flipping over. As the tariff gets bigger, so we have a larger tariff, as the tariff gets larger, then the triangles of deadweight loss become larger, and what we saw before is that the amount of tariff revenue paid by the row producer winds up becoming smaller. It gets squished in this direction, and if that's true, then the rate at which we're gaining social welfare at home slows and eventually tops out. Right? And then as you get an even larger tariff, larger still, I might say, a larger tariff still, well then these triangles become quite large. Right? That's what we saw in the last scenario. These become quite large, and as they become quite large, they begin to overwhelm what is now a very narrow box that represents the revenue being paid by the row producer, and this number starts to come down again. Social welfare is now improved relative to autarky, but not as much as it was when we had perhaps what we call a middle scenario tariff or a smaller tariff. So this starts to come down again, and then at some point when the tariff gets high enough, if the tariff becomes significantly high, then we know if it's very high, then we would call that tariff prohibitive. And if we get to a prohibitive tariff, then we return to a level of autarky social welfare. We're back to that. So that this is the socially optimal tariff curve, so we can find from that, we can find a point on here which might be this one, and if that were true, then this level of tariff, let's call that T1, would maximize home social welfare. That's as big as that gets. Alright, so this all speaks to position statement number 3. Is this okay? Is it okay for a large country to actually sit down and do this analysis and figure out, wow, T1 maximizes our welfare? We understand it does so at the cost of the row producer or the row economy or however you want to say it, but this is what is in our best interest. Is that okay for a large country to do? I look forward to seeing what you guys decide on that.